We've got a nice simple beach scene after last week's quite hard draw. I've gone panoramic, so I've taken some tape and just come across just to make my length of picture a bit longer. So it's not landscape, it's more panoramic. It just gives it a different feel. Nice and simple. So you've got about 2/3 beach, 2/3 sky. 1/3 beach, 2/3 sky. Horizon line across. Get these mountains in. This is Pembrokeshire, and then you've got your sea. You've got the reflection on the sand here, and the reflection on the sand here. Colours wise, I've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, you can use raw sienna. You just want it to be quite watery. I've got permanent rose, that's fairly watery, and cobalt blue. That's a mid colour, I'd say. It's got water in it, but it's not as strong as it could be, and it's not as weak as it could be either. It's a mid one. You want that to be mid. Okay. So it's all about technique today. We're going to wet the paper. So today, make sure if you can that you're using a cotton paper, because we're going to do a double layered sky. And a cotton paper holds the paint, and you can come over again. The paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. It's a rough paper. So I'm wetting everywhere. We're going to get a base colour on. Make sure your brush is nice and clean. You're going to come in with the Naples yellow. So what I want you to try and do is reserve some of the light. So that means leaving the white of the paper. Doesn't matter that this is running further down, it's fine. So I'm hitting the bits where the reflection is on the wet sand as well. Start to get that reflection appearing. My brush a rinse, and I'm going to come into the rose. So you'll have these mixing together. And then I'm going to come into the cobalt blue. So I want a nice circular ocean. I'm going to get this base. Blue in now. So we're not going to worry at this stage about the grey at all. This is going to come in later. Bit of kitchen towel or tissue. I want you to scrunch it up, and you're going to dab and twist. So whilst this is still damp, I want you to get some of these harder shapes of the white clouds out. So you're dabbing and you're twisting. Not worrying about the grey, just the white shapes. The grey's going to come in later. You'll see that I've left little bits of white. That's intentional, just to make sure that I'm getting the white of the cloud. You've got to make sure it doesn't dry too much. If it dries too much, you might lose it. You can always take a little bit more. You're going to come over with the grey later when it's dry. Just about getting those harder edges in at this stage. You can take a few more in if you want. It can be your interpretation. It's just this dab and twist action, and keep moving the kitchen towel so you've got a dry bit, so you're getting a nice edge. Just going to stop that running there, just dab that off. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so I've dried that really well now, and I've made a grey. This is cobalt blue. In fact, I've used this cobalt blue because I won't need this again, and a touch of rose and a touch of sepia, and it's made a purpley grey. Makes a nice warm grey. And I'm going to start to come in. So I'm just using my round number 10 to pop a bit of water on. So these are the hills or mountains in the background. We're just going to work down the picture. So the water just means it's going to flow nicely. You don't have to hit every little bit. It's quite nice to leave a little bit of the light shining through. And then this one just here. So there's lots of little stages now, and we're going to dry as we go along. So I'm going to dry that off. Okay, and I'm going to come in on the water. So it's quite hard to get a straight line on the horizon. So you want to try and see the tip of your brush. Now, after saying I've used my cobalt blue to mix the grey, I actually need a tiny bit of cobalt blue just to bring in this side. So I've just dabbed into a little bit that's on my palette. It's just a little bit more blue this side. And then you're going to come into your grey. Remember, you've seen the tip of your brush, that really helps to get that horizon line as straight as you possibly can. And then with my round number 6, I'm just going to add bits of grey where it looks a little bit darker. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so you've got a couple of little glimpses of light in this water, and I'm going to use a small flat and just a damp brush just to lift a little bit, and we can just dab that off so you can get those little bits of light quite easily once it's dry. So you just dab in and then dab it off on, dabbed into water, dab it off on the kitchen towel, and then it'll just lift those little bits of light. In a really nice controlled way. You could do this if you haven't got a flat brush with a round brush, it would still work. It's just a little bit easier with a flat, that's all. Okay, and then I'm going to come in and do this one that's a bit darker. So I'm coming straight on, there's no water here, with the grey. And I'm going to drop in a bit of sepia ink. So I'm going to use a bit of sepia ink on this painting. This is a De La Rowney FW acrylic ink. If you haven't got ink, you just want a darker mix of this grey, and that will work quite nicely. So I've just dabbed a bit of the ink on my palette. I'm just going to drop some of this in. It just gives it an extra darkness. I'm going to use it a little bit further down the picture as well. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so nice and dry. I'm going to wet this bottom section again now. Nice and carefully. I've got a soft wash brush, so I'm not lifting what I've done previously. And I'm going to get some of the grey sand in. So you don't want it to be too wet, so it's having a bit of patience. I'm just lifting a tiny little bit off so it doesn't go mad. And if you start in the central section, as in the middle, then as it's spreading, it's not spreading onto the bits that you want to keep lighter. We need to get this little bit of a base on. So this is just the same grey, we're using the same grey through the picture. So if you've got an odd dry bit anywhere, don't worry about that, that will work really nicely. Just keep an eye all the time on what's happening so that it doesn't spread too far at this stage. Just getting this base in. It's a balance of having a few soft edges and hard edges working together. It's nice to get those softer edges. So I'm just getting a clean, dry brush, just making sure this doesn't go any further. So I'm stopping it running. If it's flat, it's going to mainly stop anyway, but that's just helping make sure it stops. And we need a few little bits through here. So this is a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to get around number 6. Pick up a few little bits in this background section. If it's not wet enough, then you can just touch with a damp brush and just soften it in places. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so we've got the softer edges, we're now looking at the harder edges. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pop a bit of acrylic ink just to create this darker section here. It's a tiny little rock, and then with a damp brush I'm just going to soften that in a little bit, so it's just grounding that really. I'm going to get my small flat brush and pick up some of the grey. Grab my picture so you can see what I'm referencing, and then I'm going to come through and start to create some of the harder edges. So this bit in the background, I want to keep this still quite light. So if your brush is flat, makes it easy to get these nice little lines in. So we've got hard edges, this is creating the we've got soft edges, this is creating the harder edges. And then we're going to create the texture after this with a little bit of granulation medium and ink. If you haven't got the granulation medium, I'll explain how you might want to create the texture differently. So I'm just coming in and creating these harder edges. And again, this is just the grey, we're just going to keep using this same grey, and it's building up. Just giving us a little bit of texture. I've got the light here. So you could choose whichever brush you wanted at this stage, it's just getting a few harder edges in to mix with these softer edges. It's just about the shadows you can see really. Everything's giving it additional depth. Just swapping into my round number 10 just to get a nice flow on this bit a little bit more. You can flow it in. Looks quite nicely. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so we've got nice clean water and a really dry surface at the top. So what we're going to do now is very gently come over the whole of the sky again. Try to only hit an area once. You've got to come over the whole of the sky, otherwise you'll get a mark where it lifts the paint slightly. It's always best to try and leave this 24 hours. If you've got the luxury of time, 24 hours will make sure that it's nice and dry. Okay, I'm going to come in with a round number 6. I'm just going to make sure that I've got all the areas I need to. There's a few bits that are dry. Mist, the light's not so great today. Round number 6 with my grey, I'm going to start to come in and create the clouds. Start in an area where you don't mind it going bigger. So in the middle again, we talked about this. If it's in the middle, you've got plenty of time. Round number 6 will mean you're in more control. You're going to press down, circular motion. Pressing down stops the paint moving. So you actually want that to happen. Keep it nice and flat. Make sure you don't go over all of the edges that you've lifted. So this is about getting these nice dark clouds in now. This is the beauty of a double layered sky. What you'll find is with the mix is it does split out and it gives you a really nice effect. Remember your light, you want to try and keep your light. You can use a bigger brush if you want to, just how much you want to be in control. The more light you can keep now, the better the picture will look. So just keep an eye on that bottom bit. It's running a bit, I don't mind that as much, but I might need to try and stop it at a certain point. Get a few wispy bits in. You can come back in with a bit of a darker mix in places. And you just get this lovely effect that you can't get any other way. I'm going to dry that off now. I'm going to show you now how I'm going to get the texture. I'm going to use some granulation medium. So this is a Winsor & Newton granulation medium. I'm going to use some of the FW ink. So if you haven't got the FW ink, you can use just the dark grey watercolour that we've been using, and that would work with the granulation medium. If you haven't got the granulation medium, I'll do a few things after just to show you how you can create some texture. So I'm going to come through with a little bit of water through this bottom section here. So just this bottom foreground I'm going for. Then with my brush I'm going to pick up some of the ink, and you've got to put more in than you think. So you're going to put this in and not panic. Then you've got to load your paper with granulation medium. So I use a pipette, and you're going to bring this through. Much more than you think. So there's a good teaspoon gone on there, and then you need to agitate the surface. So you're going to go one way, the other way. You can see it start to granulate. So you're going to get that nice texture. Once you've agitated the surface, you can get your brush and you can manipulate it a little bit more. So if there's any bits that are stuck, you can move them around. So if you think I don't like that bit, just move it. You can flow the pools of granulation medium different ways as well, which works quite nicely. So if I look at the picture and think I want to extend a little bit into here, I'm just going to flow a bit of water and just bring a little bit into this background section. Then you want to flow it off one way or the other. So I've just got some kitchen towel here. I'm just taking that off. We'll see in a second the texture that I've got. Just dab that edge just to make sure that's coming off. And there we go. That's how you use granulation medium. I'm just going to dry that off, and then I'll show you a few other ways to pop texture in. Okay. So that's dried. I've just covered up the section of my picture that I don't want to splatter. I've loaded the brush with some grey, and I'm just going to tap. Keep it as close as you can, but this is another way of adding texture. Random texture. It might hit your wall a bit. You can come in and you can create a few painted rocks in. The trick is to not paint too much, because if you paint too much you can tell that it's not random. If you don't get on with the brush method, you can use a toothbrush. That gives a lot more finer texture. Let's grab my toothbrush. So any old toothbrush will do. You dab into the paint and then you pull towards your hand like that. Again, keeping it very low. So I've not actually dabbed that in the paint. And then the other way is with a palette knife. And again, it's just loading it up and then you can flick the palette knife and it has a similar effect. Splattering, so it's just how you find it easy to splatter. So I'm just flicking and I've got it there underneath and it's hitting the paper. So whichever one you find easiest. So just with a little bit of sepia ink, I'm just creating a few of these rocky bits, so a bit darker. It all adds to the effect. A little bit down there, and then with a just a damp brush, what you can do is just touch at each side, and it just softens that and grounds it, so they don't appear to be floating. It gives them a little bit of shadow on the surface. It just depends how much dark you've already got there, really. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. And there we go, so we're all finished. I've just taken the tape off either side and it's a nice seascape there. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week.